It was a Tuesday in February, which in Calgary means the kind of cold that makes your teeth ache just walking from the parking lot to the front door. I was at my desk reviewing a commercial lease amendment when my phone buzzed with a notification I'd never seen before, a credit alert from Equifax. A new account had been opened in my name. I set down my coffee. I opened the app. I read the line 3 times because I was certain I was misreading it. A personal line of credit. $94,000. Opened 6 days ago through a mid-sized credit union in Red Deer. I had never banked in Red Deer in my life. I'd never even driven through Red Deer in the last 2 years. My name is Sierra. I'm a corporate paralegal. I spend my days making sure documents are airtight, signatures are verified, and nothing falls through the cracks. The irony was not lost on me. Have you ever had that feeling where the floor doesn't exactly drop out from under you, but it tilts? Like the whole room shifts 3 degrees and nothing looks right anymore. That was the moment. I set my phone face down on the desk, took one breath, and then picked it back up and called the credit union. The representative was polite. She asked me to verify my date of birth, my SIN, my current address. I answered everything correctly. Then she told me the account had been opened in branch with a valid government-issued ID and a secondary piece of identification. She said she couldn't tell me more over the phone. She said I'd need to come in or file a dispute in writing. I hung up. I opened my laptop. I pulled up my Equifax report in full. There were 2 accounts I didn't recognize. The personal line of credit in Red Deer, $94,000, already drawn down to $61,000. And a secured credit card with a $2,000 limit opened at the same time. Both listed my employer correctly. Both listed my correct phone number. Whoever opened these accounts knew enough about me to pass the verification questions at a credit union desk. There are only so many people in the world who know your date of birth, your SIN, your employer, and your current address. The list is not long. My mother had asked me for my SIN 2 years ago when she said she needed to add me to a spousal RRSP. Her accountant was apparently setting up for inheritance planning purposes. I remember thinking it was a bit unusual, but she had a document that looked official and her accountant had a website and an office on the south side of Edmonton. I gave it to her. I trusted her. She was my mother. I didn't call my mother that afternoon. I called a lawyer. Not a family lawyer. Not the kind you call when someone's feelings are hurt at Thanksgiving. I called a woman named Philippa who works in civil litigation and financial fraud. I'd done file prep for her firm twice on secondment, and I knew how she operated. She picked up on the first ring, which was unusual for her. I said, "Philippa, I need your help. I have a situation." She asked me to describe it. I described it. There was a pause, and I could hear her typing. She asked, "Who else has access to your identifying documents?" I told her, "My mother. Possibly my sister who lived at home until 18 months ago." Another pause. She said, "Send me the credit reports and don't contact either of them yet. Don't close the accounts. Don't dispute anything. Don't move money. I need you to not touch anything until I've had a look." I said, "Understood." She said, "And Sarah, don't go home tonight. Not if they have your address on those accounts." I stayed at a friend's place that night with my laptop and a bag I packed in 11 minutes. I sat on her couch and I pulled up every financial account I had and I started building a spreadsheet. Every account, every balance, every statement going back 3 years. It was something to do with my hands while my brain tried to catch up with what was actually happening. My mother had always struggled with money in a particular way, not the chaotic, unpredictable way of someone who has no sense of finances, but in the quiet, organized way of someone who knows exactly how much they need and where to find it. She had a good eye for opportunity. She had always had a gift for framing her problems as other people's responsibilities. When my father passed 6 years ago, she got the house in Sherwood Park. The car, the savings, it was not an insignificant amount. Within 2 years, most of it was gone. There was always a reason. A furnace replacement, a legal dispute with a neighbor that required a lawyer and then another lawyer and then somehow a third, a renovation that went wrong, a small investment that didn't work out. She never asked for money directly. She presented you with a situation and waited for you to offer. And I always offered, because that was what you did. Because offering meant you were good and capable, and not the kind of person who let family suffer when you had something to give. My sister had her own dynamic with her mother. They were close in a way that had always looked more like alliance than affection. My sister had moved back home twice in 4 years, and each time there was a reason that was externally plausible and internally convenient. She drove my mother's car. She used my mother's Costco card. She borrowed money she described as temporary and then never mentioned again. I had not been blind to this. I had just decided over and over again that it wasn't my business, that I had my own life in Calgary, that I was the one who got out and made something, and the least I could do was not make it about me. Philippa called me the next morning at 7:30. She said, "I need you to come to my office." I was there by 9. She had a folder on her desk. She had already contacted the credit union through a formal legal inquiry. She had also, she said, run some preliminary searches. The accounts were opened with a provincial ID card that bore my name and SIN but a different photo. The credit union was cooperating fully. The signature on the application matched a pattern consistent with a practiced forgery, not perfect, but close enough to pass a branch-level check by a teller who was dealing with a normal Tuesday afternoon and no reason to be suspicious. She slid a piece of paper across the desk. The secondary identification used to open the account was a utility bill. My name, my SIN, my mother's address in Sherwood Park. I stared at it. She said the address on file confirms the account holder lives in Sherwood Park. The funds were accessed twice after opening. Both times at an ATM branch in Sherwood Park. She paused. The IP address used to set up online access for the account traces to a residential address in Sherwood Park. I said, "I understand." She said, "I know this is difficult." I said, "What are my options?" She leaned back. She told me, I could file a police report and let the investigation proceed. I could pursue civil recovery of the $61,000 already drawn. I could do both simultaneously. I should also file fraud alerts with both Equifax and TransUnion immediately and request a credit freeze. She said she would draft a cease and desist. She said the moment I confirmed I wanted to proceed, she would move fast. I looked at the utility bill with my name and my mother's address, and I thought about every time I had handed over a piece of myself believing it was for something that made sense. I said, I want to proceed. And that was the moment I stopped being a daughter and became a claimant. The credit freeze went up that afternoon. The police report was filed the next morning. Philippa's team moved faster than I expected, and within 4 days there were 2 things happening simultaneously that I was not prepared for. The first was a phone call from my sister. Her voice was careful and slightly elevated, which is how she sounds when she's managing a situation and knows it. She said, "Mom told me you got some kind of credit alert. She said you're overreacting and you should just call her before you do anything you can't take back." I said, "I'll be in touch." She said, "Sierra, this is a family matter. You don't need lawyers involved in a family matter." I said, "I'll be in touch," and I hung up. The second thing that happened I didn't expect at all. Philippa called me on Thursday morning and said, "I need you to come in again. There's something I need to show you that I didn't have when we last spoke." When I walked into her office, she had 2 folders this time. She told me that in the course of the civil inquiry, her team had pulled the full credit history attached to my SIN going back 5 years. The Red Deer accounts were not the first time my information had been used. 3 years ago, there was a telecommunications account, a business phone plan with 4 lines opened under my SIN as a sole proprietor. The account had been in default for 8 months before it was written off. It appeared on my credit history as a derogatory mark I had never been able to explain, the one that had caused a mortgage lender to ask questions 2 years ago when I applied for my first property and then quietly declined. She slid the second folder across. "I need you to look at this carefully," she said, "before you decide how to proceed." Inside was a printed email chain. Her team had requested records from the telecommunications provider as part of the inquiry. The account had been set up with a contact email address. That email address was not mine. It was a Gmail account with a variation of my name that I'd never seen before, but the billing address on the telecommunications account, the one used to open 4 business phone lines 3 years ago, was my mother's house in Sherwood Park. And the name on the contact record for the account set up was not my mother's name. It was my father's brother. My uncle had been estranged from our family for as long as I could remember. My mother spoke of him in one specific way, with a particular combination of sorrow and disgust that I had absorbed as the complete picture. She said he had borrowed money from my father before my father passed and never repaid it. She said he had been unreliable his entire adult life. She said she'd had to cut him off for the sake of the family's stability. I had maybe met him twice as a child. I had not thought about him in years. His name on a 3-year-old telecommunications billing record was the last thing I expected to see. I asked Philippa, what does this mean? She said it means he may have been trying to flag something that was already happening. Or it means he was involved. I don't know which yet, but he has apparently been trying to reach your lawyer's office for 2 days because someone on staff found a message he left after seeing news of our inquiry come through a civil registry search. She slid a sticky note across, a phone number with a 780 area code. She said, "The decision is yours." I drove to Edmonton that weekend. I had called the head. I had been brief on the phone, told him only who I was and that I was coming. He didn't seem surprised. He said, "I've been waiting a while for this call." He lived in a modest house in the west end of the city. He answered the door in a cardigan, which for some reason I remembered afterward. He looked like someone who had been tired for a long time and had made a kind of peace with it. He looked like my father in the jaw and in the eyes, which was the part that hit me sideways and that I wasn't prepared for. We sat at his kitchen table. He made tea. And then he told me things that rearranged the last 15 years of my life. He said when my father was diagnosed, in the months before he passed, the two brothers had talked. My father had concerns about what would happen after. Not general concerns, specific ones. He had watched my mother manage money their entire marriage, and he understood how she thought. He had wanted to set up something structured, something that would protect me specifically. Not my sister, he said, and I watched my uncle's face carefully when he said it, not as a slight, but because my father understood his two daughters in a specific way and understood that I was the one who would be out in the world making something, and therefore the one most vulnerable to a particular kind of pressure. My father had tried to set up a registered account in both our names, a TFSA with a named beneficiary designation, and a formal instruction that it was to be passed directly to me outside of the estate. My mother had been the executor. She had closed it during probate and absorbed it into the estates. My uncle had raised this with the estate lawyer at the time. The estate lawyer said it was within the executor's discretion and declined to pursue it. My uncle had paid his own lawyer to review. His own lawyer had agreed it was technically legal. He had never forgiven himself for not pushing harder. He said he had spent the years since watching from a distance, the only way my mother had allowed. Every few years something would surface, a credit inquiry, a collections notice, something that suggested my information was being used without my knowledge. He had tried twice to reach me directly. He didn't know my address. He sent letters to my old university email, which I had stopped checking. He filed a formal concern with a provincial consumer protection registry in 2021, which had gone nowhere. The telecommunications account, he explained, was how he had tried to create a paper trail. He had opened a business account using the same SIN-related information he suspected my mother was accessing, but with his own contact details so that if anyone ever pulled the records there would be a discrepancy, a breadcrumb that didn't quite fit. It was an imperfect strategy and he knew it. He'd been hoping it would eventually reach someone who would know what to do with it. I looked at him across the table. I said, "Why didn't you fight harder? When my father's estate was settled, why didn't you keep pushing?" He wrapped both hands around his mug. He said, "Because I tried to reach you twice and you didn't respond, and because I understood that whatever I said, you would have heard it through your mother's version of me first. A contested estrangement is a very specific kind of credibility problem. I couldn't rescue someone who didn't know they needed rescuing." He paused. He said, "The credit alert you got in February, that was the moment I'd been waiting for. That meant you were already looking. That meant you were ready to see it." I drove back to Calgary on Sunday. I sat in my car in the parking garage for about 12 minutes before I went upstairs. Philippa filed a civil suit on Monday. By Wednesday, the asset trace was complete. My mother's house in Sherwood Park was mortgaged to 80% of its value. Her vehicle was leased. Her checking account had a recurring transfer to my sister's account going back 22 months. My sister had used the funds to pay for a lifestyle that had outrun her income by a significant margin, a lease on a vehicle she couldn't afford, a storage unit full of things she apparently couldn't stop buying, and a series of e-transfers to a man her social media identified as a boyfriend whose financial situation I will simply describe as precarious. The $61,000 drawn from the credit line in my name had moved through my mother's account in 3 tranches. The first to the mortgage arrears, the second to my sister, the third to a contractor who had done work on the Sherwood Park house, built under my mother's name, paid with money that was legally mine. When the process server delivered the civil claim, my mother called me 40 minutes later. She had clearly been crying, but the crying had stopped by the time she dialed, and what was left was the version of her I had always feared, more than the tears, The cold, bright voice she used when she wanted you to understand the gravity of what you were doing to her. She said, Sarah, I need you to hear me out. I said, okay. She said, what you're doing is going to destroy this family. Whatever problems there were with money, we could have dealt with this privately. You have brought lawyers into our family. Do you understand what that does to us? Do you understand what your father would think? I said, I think about what my father thought quite often. She paused. The pause was short. She said, you're going to regret this. I said, I already regret the years I spent assuming the best about things I should have questioned. She said, your sister is devastated. She had nothing to do with this. You're punishing her for something she didn't understand. I said, she received $23,000 over 22 months from a line of credit opened fraudulently in my name. Whether she understood it or not, she has to account for it. My mother's voice shifted into something older and rawer. She said, I did what I had to do. You had everything. You went to school. You got a good job. You left. I was here. I was holding everything together with nothing. You would have never given it willingly. That was the moment I had been waiting for, without knowing I was waiting for it. Not an apology, not even a justification really. Just the thing that had always been true finally said out loud, that she had decided what I owed her before she asked, that asking was never actually part of the plan. I said, I know. And I hung up. The civil hearing was in April. My mother and sister appeared with a lawyer who tried to argue that the financial transfers constituted informal family support arrangements with implied consent. He used the phrase family dynamics 4 times. He used the phrase informal economy twice. Philippa presented the credit union records, the IP trace, the forged ID documentation, the 3-year-old telecommunications filing, and the sworn statement from my uncle detailing the timeline of his concerns going back to the original estate settlement. It took the judge less time than I expected. She found that the line of credit had been opened through fraudulent misrepresentation. She ordered full repayment of the $61,000 drawn, plus legal costs. She referred the forgery evidence to the provincial crown for potential criminal charges. She was particularly pointed in her remarks about the telecommunications paper trail. She noted that the existence of a documented prior concern, however informally constructed, demonstrated a pattern that significantly undermined any claim of a one-time misunderstanding. My mother did not look at me during any of this. My sister looked at me once near the end, and I had been right about what I said to my mother. She had been crying for the money. The look on her face was not grief or guilt or even anger. It was the particular blankness of someone who has just understood that a financial structure they didn't examine too closely has collapsed. I met my uncle for dinner that evening at a restaurant near the courthouse. He ordered soup. I ordered something I can't now remember. We sat for a while without saying much. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out a folded piece of paper. He set it on the table between us. He said, "This is a copy of a letter your father wrote before he passed. His lawyer had instructions to provide it to you directly when you turned 25. It was apparently intercepted during probate. I obtained a copy through the estate records. I've been holding it for 2 years waiting for the right moment." I unfolded the paper. My father's handwriting, which I knew from birthday cards and grocery lists, looked smaller on this page, more careful. He had written, "I know this may reach you too late, or at the wrong time, or not at all. But I want you to know that what I built thinking of you. Not to give you things, you've never needed things from me, but to leave you something that couldn't be taken. The account details are with my brother. He knows what to do. I trust you already know how to use it." I folded the paper carefully. I put it in my bag. I didn't cry at the table, which surprised me. The crying came later, at home, in a way that felt less like grief and more like something releasing. Like a breath I had been holding for 6 years without realizing I was holding it. My uncle and I have had dinner twice since then. We talk about my father sometimes. We talk about other things too. What he's been doing, what I'm doing, small ordinary things that feel like the beginning of a different kind of normal. He's not trying to replace anything. Neither am I. But there's something there that was missing before and I didn't have language for until I found it. I changed my banking entirely. New accounts, new institution, new contact details. I put a permanent fraud alert on my credit files. I updated my SIN-related information with the CRA directly and flagged the file for manual review on any future applications. Philippa says the Crown's referral is still active. I don't follow it closely, It's not mine to manage anymore. The house in Sherwood Park, sold in June as part of the court-ordered asset realization. I drove past it once, not on purpose. I was coming back from visiting a friend in the area and the route took me down that street. I slowed down out of reflex more than intention. It looked the same. Someone had put a planter by the front door with petunias in it, yellow ones. I kept driving. There's a thing people say about family, that they're your foundation, your roots. And for a long time I believed that. I thought the discomfort of being pulled at and drained and quietly taken from was just the cost of being rooted somewhere. That it was normal to feel both held and trapped by the same people. That tolerating it was a kind of love. What I understand now is the difference between roots and weight. Roots feed you. Weight just keeps you from moving. And the hardest thing about weight is that it can look like roots for a very long time, especially when you're not looking straight at it. Especially when looking straight at it means seeing something you're not ready to see. I was ready in February. It just took a credit alert at 7:40 in the morning on a Tuesday in Calgary to make that clear. If you've ever had to look clearly at something you've been looking around for years, I'd like to hear your story in the comments. And if this one reached someone who needed it, please share it with them. Sometimes the signal gets through when the timing is finally right. I keep coming back to the credit alert. A single notification at 7:40 on a Tuesday morning in February in a city that was -20 outside, and everything I thought I knew about my own life started to shift. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just 3 degrees like the floor tilting, and then I couldn't unnotice it. What I understand now, having gone through all of it, the civil claim, the court date, the dinner with my uncle, the letter in my father's handwriting, is that the consequences were never really sudden. They just looked sudden from where I was standing. My mother had been making choices for years, small ones and large ones, the kind that compound quietly until one day a credit union in Red Deer has your SIN attached to an account you never opened. The outcome didn't appear from nowhere. It followed directly from what she chose to do, and what she chose to believe she was entitled to. That's the part that took me a while to sit with. Not the anger, but the clarity. Actions accumulate. They have weight. Eventually, that weight lands somewhere. And I had been making choices too. Every time I handed over a document without asking a follow-up question, every time I absorbed the discomfort of being pulled at because questioning it felt disloyal, every time I decided that what I could see clearly, I would choose not to look at directly. I'm not saying I caused what happened. I'm saying I participated in the conditions that made it possible, and understanding that really understanding it without turning it into self-blame was its own kind of work. Philippa told me once, near the end of the civil process, that the thing that had made the strongest impression on the judge was not the fraud itself, but the telecommunications breadcrumb my uncle had left 3 years earlier. The patience of it. The foresight. He hadn't known if it would ever be found. He'd done it anyway because it was the right thing to construct. The careful thing. The thing a person does when they've decided to be honest about what they're seeing, even when no one is listening yet. That kind of integrity doesn't get rewarded on a schedule. It just quietly builds the foundation that eventually holds the weight of the truth when the truth finally needs somewhere to stand. I think about my father writing that letter, the deliberateness of it. Knowing he might not be able to protect me directly, so he built what protection he could with the time and clarity he had left. That's not something you do impulsively. That's something you do when you've thought hard about what matters, what's right, and what the people you love are going to need after you're gone. What I carry forward from all of this is not the victory of the courtroom or the apartment in Calgary, or even my uncle's soup at the restaurant table. What I carry forward is something quieter, the understanding that clear-eyed honesty about what you're seeing, what you're allowing, what you actually know, is not cruelty. It's the most responsible thing you can offer yourself and the people around you, that the strength to act on what you know, even when acting is slow and costly and frightening, is the only kind of strength that actually resolves anything, and that the quality of a person's character shows not in the big moments but in the small, sustained choices they make when no one is watching, and there's no guarantee it will matter. I was ready in February. I just didn't know it yet.